The alarm was the first thing, not a gentle wake sequence, not the soft blue light and the warm hiss of pressurized air that the manual promised. The alarm was raw and sharp and wrong, the kind of sound a machine makes when it has been waiting a very long time to say something bad. Elena opened her eyes. The cryopod ceiling was right there, too. In from her nose the same scratched plexiglass she had stared at when the door sealed, but the scratches were different now, deeper, and there was something growing in the corner of the seal, a thin green-black line, organic and patient, that had not been there before. She blinked. Her body felt like furniture that had been in storage too long. The display panel on the inside of the lid was flashing a number. She read it 3 times. She read it a 4th time. 1,040,2,311. Years, 7 months, 16 days. The recalibration had to be wrong. She reached up with one stiff arm and ran the diagnostic manually. Her fingers remembered the sequence even when the rest of her brain was still catching up. 3 taps, hold 2 taps. The display ran the check. Return the same number. She said very quietly, Pod 7, I have always hated you. The pod clicked and the lid cracked open, and the smell hit her before anything else. Not the recycled metal tang of the station, not the clean emptiness of controlled atmosphere. This was rain and copper and something warm and green and alive, something that had been growing for a very long time, without anyone giving it permission. She sat up, or she tried to. Her muscles had the structural integrity of wet paper. She made it halfway and stopped, gripping the pod edge, breathing. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, loud in her teeth. The station was gone. Not dramatically gone, not debris and fire, just gone the way a building goes when a forest gets 1,000,000 years to have an opinion about it. The walls were there still, in shape and in memory, but they were buried inside something else. Now, vines the diameter of her thigh ran through where the corridor used to be. The ceiling panels had become soil. The floor had become something she would need to catalog later when her legs worked. She looked at her hands. They were the same hands. That seemed unreasonable. Her tablet was in the side compartment, right where she had put it. It had a crack across the screen now, a diagonal line from corner to corner that had not been there before, but when she pressed the power button, it turned on. And the light of it was the most familiar thing in the world, and she held it for a moment longer than necessary. 4,411. Archived entries, everything she had cataloged before the door sealed, every human voice, every human face, every record she had been able to pull in the last 3 weeks when she understood what was happening and what she needed to do before it was too late. She opened a new entry, typed the date from the pod display, stared at the number, closed the entry without writing anything else. She needed to assess the situation. Systems check, that was the protocol. She had written the protocol herself on day 2 of the project before anyone believed the project would ever actually be used. She ran it now the same way she had written it, methodically, without feeling. External atmosphere, breathable, oxygen levels higher than baseline, temperature within human tolerance, biological activity off every chart she had. She had charts for 12,000 catalog species. The readings matched none of them exactly. They matched a cluster of them at 94.7%. The cluster was labeled in her archive under early cephalopod primate hybrid, fauna tier 3, developmental state, presentient. She ran the recalibration on the sensor. It came back the same. She ran it again. Same. She put the tablet down and picked it up again and ran the atmospheric scan from scratch manually, step by step, because the calibration was clearly off, and this was a problem she could solve, and she was going to solve it right now. The scan came back the same. Far in the distance, through the gap where the station's north wall used to be, through the curtain of green and living things that had swallowed the whole structure and kept growing, she could see something that the trees around it were not tall enough to hide. A structure, geometric, deliberate. Not a natural formation. Not the station. Something new, something built. She sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then she stood up, which took longer. Then 4 seconds, and pulled her field jacket from the storage compartment and checked that her tablet was secure to her belt, and put one foot in front of the other until she was standing in what had once been the doorway of the cryo chamber. The world outside was immense and green, and utterly unconcerned with her. She pulled out her tablet and started a new log entry. Day 1, she said out loud, to the trees, to the air, to the million-year silence that had been keeping her place. Let's see what you became. She walked toward the structure. Her legs were getting better with every step. By the time the trees thinned and the structure resolved into something readable, she was moving steadily, and her hands were already taking notes, and the crack across her tablet screen was not affecting the display at all. She was fine. Everything was completely, structurally fine. She did not look back at the pod. The structure was a city. Not immediately. First it was a wall, then a gate, then a road that was more grown than built, the stones set into the earth with the particular logic of something designed around roots rather than in spite of them. Then it was a market, if markets had 7-limbed vendors arranging objects on woven platforms, while 2 of their limbs conducted an entirely separate conversation with someone across the square. Elena stopped at the edge of the tree line and watched. They were tall, taller than she expected. From the fauna index, but 1,000,000 years of development will do that. Their bodies were organized around a central mass with 7 limbs that moved independently and with terrifying coordination, like each one had its own opinion, and the body had learned to manage the committee. Their skin shifted color in subtle gradients as they moved, not dramatically, just the way a mood crosses a human face. She had 700,000 words in her archive. She did not have a word for what she felt watching them. She stepped out of the tree line. Things went badly within the first 30 seconds. The road was higher than it looked from the trees. There was a root. Her boot found it at exactly the wrong angle, and the next thing she knew, she was pitching forward with the elegance of a supply crate rolling off a loading dock, arms out, tablet clutched to her chest, and then she hit something that was not the ground. The something was warm and solid and very large. She bounced off it and sat down hard on the road and looked up. 7 limbs, central mass, 4 eyes, arranged in a horizontal band across what she was choosing to call a face. All 4 eyes were directed at her with an expression she had no cultural context for, but which felt deep in her. Gut like the expression a person makes when they are trying very hard not to react to something unexpected. I am fine, she said in English, because her brain had not yet unlocked any other option. The creature made a sound, low and complex with harmonics she could feel in her sternum. She looked at her tablet. Translation module was running. It was pulling from the archive, from the 40 prelinguistic and proto-linguistic base structures she had cataloged, cross-referencing the phoneme patterns, building something. The progress bar sat at 11% and did not move quickly. The creature spoke again, softer this time, slower, like it had noticed the tablet and drawn a conclusion. She thought, they know what a tablet is, they have seen this before. Then she thought, they have seen a tablet before because someone like me was here before, a long time ago. Someone like me stood in this world and they remember. The translation bar hit 23%. She could pick out one word, repeated twice in 2 separate sentences. She knew that word. It was her word, her species word. They were saying human. She sat on a road in a city she had never seen, in a world that had grown over the bones of everything she had ever known, surrounded by 7-limbed beings descended from creatures she had cataloged as presentient 1,000,000 years ago, and they were saying her word, like they had been waiting to say it out loud. The translation bar hit 47%. She stood up, brushed off her jacket, and said it very clearly, my name is Elena. I have a lot of questions. The creature's color shifted, warm, something in the amber range. It put one limb out, palm forward in a gesture that needed no translation at all. They took her to the elder. The elder's name, as best Elena could transliterate it, sounded like Maroa's, and she was ancient by any measure, her 7 limbs moving slowly and with enormous authority, her color patterned, deep and complex in ways that Elena's eyes were not yet calibrated to fully read. She received Elena in a room built for large gatherings but currently empty. Just the two of them and a translator, who was working from the same linguistic structure Elena's tablet was building, from which meant they understood each other at a pace that was technically functional but emotionally slow. Maroa studied her for a long time. Then she asked through the translator a question that arrived as, are you the sleeping one, the one the pod marked pending? Elena's tablet hand went very still. What pod? She said. Maroa's turned to a young aide, said something rapid and layered, and the aide left and returned quickly, carrying something sealed in clear preservation resin, held in both hands the way you hold something irreplaceable. Elena took it. Through the resin she could see it clearly, blue, cylindrical, a logo that had survived 1,000,000 years of burial and careful preservation and generations of being passed down as something sacred. A big pen, standard ballpoint, the kind she had carried in her jacket pocket for 3 weeks before the cryo door sealed. The kind she had run out of ink in on day 19. She held it for a long time. She turned it over once. She checked the logo with the same thoroughness she would apply to any archaeological artifact. Material, composition, approximate manufacture, date, preservation, quality, she noted. All of it in her head, in the structured way she noted everything. She did not note what it weighed in her hands. Where did you find this? She asked. Mara asked, from the ground, very deep, in the layer that the historians call The human stratum, found over many centuries in many places, carefully kept as they were asked to keep it. Asked by whom, Elena said. By those who were here before, Mara. Asked by Sid, by the ones who taught us to keep the fire going. Elena put the pen on the table between them, then she picked it up again, then she put it in her jacket pocket because it did not belong in a display case. I need to know what happened, she said, to my people. What happened to the humans? The room went very quiet. Mara asked. His color shifted to something in the blue-gray range. The aide was still. The translator paused for a moment that was not about language. Then Mara spoke, and the words came through slowly, choosing carefully. She said, we have a word for the grief. That belongs to someone else's ancestors. We learned it from the records they left us. We have used it for a long time. We used it because they told us we would need it. They knew we would grieve for them. They told us that was the right thing to feel. The translator offered a word Elena did not recognize, something that sat between languages. Kivyuk Lee, the translator, added, it is the word they used for you specifically. It means shadow. They said a shadow would come. They said to keep the record open until the shadow arrived. She had been marked pending for 1,000,000 years. She sat with that. She sat with it the same way she had sat with the time stamp in the pod and the sensor readings that would not recalibrate, in the sound of her own heartbeat in a world that had moved on without her. Then she opened her tablet to a new log entry and started cataloging the room. She described the architecture, the material composition of the walls, the approximate construction period, the acoustic properties of the ceiling. She wrote a detailed entry about the preservation resin technique and its superior properties compared to the archival methods of her own era. She did not write about the pen. She put the tablet away. She asked Maruez if there was somewhere she could stay. There was, of course there was. It had been ready for a long time. The room they gave her was built for a biped. That was what hit her first, not the scale or the quality of it, the shape. The door frame was the right height. The sleeping surface was flat and long. The shelving was at a height that needed no adjustment. Someone at some point in of this city had built a room that assumed a human would one day need it. She stood in the doorway. Then she walked in and put the pen on the shelf and sat on the edge of the sleeping surface and stared at the wall and said nothing, and felt a great deal that she declined to log. She stayed there until the light outside changed, and then she stayed a little longer, and the city beyond the window continued making the sounds of a living place, and eventually she opened her tablet and started a new maintenance log for Pod 7, and by the time she stopped writing it was 3 pages long, and she had only covered the first 70 years of calibration drift. She felt better. She had a lot more to write. In the morning, Mara sent the aide, whose name translated roughly as seal, who moved quickly and spoke in brief, compressed phrases, and regarded Elena with the focused curiosity of someone studying something they had prepared for, but never expected to actually encounter. Seal was young by Oru standards. Probably, Elena was still calibrating the age-to-appearance correlation. The great repository, Seal said, through the translator in Elena's earpiece, which had improved overnight, because she had fed it 6 more hours of spoken Oru from the ambient recording. she had taken at dinner. Mara says you must see it. What is it? Elena said. Everything, Seal said and appeared, entirely satisfied with that answer. It was 11 km of living crystal. That was not a metaphor. The repository grew. Elena could see it when they arrived. The outer structures, incrementally taller than the survey Seal referenced from last season, the lattice expanding at roughly 2 per week, adding new nodes to its storage network the way a tree adds rings. It stored information in crystalline molecular patterns, and it also, Seal explained at some length while Elena walked with her head tilted back, was capable of generating new connections between existing stored nodes, which meant it did not simply keep knowledge. It thought about it. It thinks, Elena said. Slowly, Seal said, not the way you think, the way a mountain decides where the river goes. Elena took 6 pictures of the exterior, opened a new catalog entry, stopped. She had not asked the obvious question. How old is it? She said. Seal gave a number. Elena did the conversion. The repository had been founded 847,000 years ago. She walked through the entrance, which was shaped for Oru anatomy. And the moment she crossed the threshold, something happened that she was not prepared for. The entrance chamber lit up. Not the ambient lighting, something deeper inside the walls, a specific sequence like a pattern activating. The light moved through the crystal in a wave that started at her feet and spread upward and outward through the lattice. In every direction. A voice spoke. In English. Her English, the English of her era. With the cadence of the 23rd century. Cadence she had been the only living speaker of since she woke up. Archive access protocol initiated, the voice said, biometric confirmation. Received. Welcome, Elena, we hoped you would come. She stood completely still. This message was recorded, the voice continued. In the year that your calendar would call 2287. You will know this is not a live transmission. We recorded it knowing that we recorded it because we wanted you to hear a voice you recognized. We wanted the first thing the repository said to you to be in a language that was yours. 2287. The year before she went in. Someone had recorded this message while she was still awake. We have prepared an access path. Voice said, walk to the blue-lit node. Everything we built here, everything we kept is yours, all of it was always yours. The blue light was 40 m ahead at the end of a path through the crystal lattice. She walked it, her footsteps were the only sound in the whole 11 km. The node was a column of crystal at head height, and when she placed her hand on it, the surface was warm in a way that felt like temperature and also like something she did not have a word for. The archive opened. The crystal expanded layer by layer, unfolding its stored data into a format her tablet could read, feeding directly into her translation module, and Elena stood in the center of it and read. She read for a long time. The short version, assembled over 6 hours, was this. Humanity had known, not in the vague, anxious way of any species that suspects its time is limited, but with the specific clarity of a civilization that had finally learned to read the long-range stellar data. A slow catastrophe was coming, not quick, not survivable by staying. The timeline was 3 generations out when they confirmed it, which was enough time to do something other than panic. They had chosen to do something. The Oru's ancestors, the presentient hybrid fauna she had catalogued in Tier 3 had been identified as candidates. Intelligent, social, adaptable, with the right guidance in enough time, the record said they could become something extraordinary. Humanity had given them the time. 40,000 years of careful, patient, generational work, teaching without controlling, guiding without disrupting. The records of it were meticulous and sometimes hard to read, not because they were sorrowful, but because they were written by people who loved what they were doing and knew they would not live to see it finished. One record written by a woman named Clara Owen in year 12,000 of the project said only, they asked where the stars come from today, we told them the truth. They were not afraid. Elena read that entry twice. She did not read it a third time. The human civilization had not been destroyed. It had translated. The repository used that word specifically and deliberately. They had moved collectively across 4,000 years into something the repository described in language that was more physics than biology. They had gone somewhere, not quietly, not sadly. They had gone the way humans go anywhere, with arguments about the best route and complaints about the timeline and an absolute refusal to leave until the people they were leaving behind would be okay. They had left a signal. Elena found the coordinates. She ran the stellar drift calculation. The signal was still active, 1.4 gigahertz. Constant, a million years of constant. She was already calculating what it would take to reach it when the repository offered her one final file. The last transmission, 17 minutes audio only. She sat down on the floor of the repository. She pressed play. A woman's voice, older, singing in a language that was part something Elena recognized and part something that had grown in the centuries between them. Melody she had never heard and somehow already understood, the kind of song that is the same song in every language, because it is not really about the words. The repository had been broadcasting this on a 1.4 gigahertz loop for 1 million years, because someone had decided the universe should always have a human song in it. Elena listened to all 17 minutes. She sat on the floor for a little while. After it ended, then she stood up and walked back to the entrance and found Seal waiting outside, with the particular expression of someone who has learned not to ask questions and instead just holds the space. I need a ship, Elena said. Seal said, Mara said you would say that. Did she have an answer? She said, we have been keeping one ready for a very long time. The ship was called Venisara, which translated as the one that waits with purpose. Elena chose to find that reasonable. It was Aru built, which meant it was Aru shaped, which meant the corridors were wide and the vertical clearance was designed for radial anatomy, and the control surfaces were arranged in a 7-point configuration that assumed the operator had 7 limbs in simultaneous use. The ship's original crew complement was 12 Aru. Reconfigured for this journey, it would carry 7 Aru and 1 human, and the 1 human had spent 2 days walking the corridors with a measuring tape and a specific list of necessary changes. She got a chair. It was built in 4 days by an Aru fabricator named Den, who worked without sleep and produced something that was exactly the right height and slightly too wide and entirely functional. And Elena told him it was excellent work. And he held very still for a moment in the way she was learning to recognize as the Oru version of being pleased. She told Mara she was leaving. We know, Mara said, the old Oru's color was something in the warm range. Kivuli walks toward the light. This is the nature of a shadow. That is either very profound or very simple, Elena said. Both, Mara said, most true things. Lord, the crew was 7. Sio came without asking, simply by being at the ship when the departure window opened and looking at Elena with an expression that contained no question and considerable certainty. Den came because he had apparently decided that a vessel he had modified was now his responsibility. The other 5 were young, scientifically trained, and possessed of the energy of people who have spent their entire lives studying something they never expected to actually encounter. They had spent their entire lives studying humans. They had questions, many of them. They were, to their considerable credit, attempting to pace themselves. On day 2 of the journey, one of them appeared in the doorway of the small workspace Elena had set up in the least Oru-shaped section of the ship. This one had, upon Elena's suggestion that the crew could choose names for the journey, selected the designation Ori 7, which Elena respected without comment. You are working again, Ori 7 said. I am always working, Elena said. You worked for 9 hours without a break yesterday. There was a lot to catalog. Ori 7 was quiet for a moment. What are you cataloging? Elena looked at the screen. She had been writing a detailed technical critique of Pod 7's calibration failures across 1,000,000 years. It was currently 61 pages long. She had been adding to it for 3 days. Maintenance documentation, she said. Ori 7 looked at the page count, said nothing about it. Elena appreciated this deeply. May I ask you something? Ori 7 said. One question, Elena said. Ori 7 moved into the workspace and settled all 7 limbs, finding their configuration, and looked at her directly with all 4 eyes and said, What are you afraid of finding? She opened her mouth to say something technical, something about signal decay, about unknowns in a translated civilization, about the variables, long-range contact with an entity that had been evolving 1,000,000 years beyond human baseline. What came out instead was that they are better than I remember us being. The workspace was very quiet. And that they are not, she said. She looked at the secondary display. The signal graph she plotted every morning was on screen. It had been trending in one direction for 18 days. Stronger every morning, measurably stronger. Ori 7 stood, moved to the doorway, paused. In the repository, Ori 7 said carefully, There is a record from year 8000 of the Uplift Project. A human named Owen Clark wrote it. He said, We are not gods. We are people who got here first. We are scared and we are tired and we love these people we are building, and we will not see them finished, but someone will. I have read that record, Elena said. He also wrote, Ori 7 said, that he hoped whoever woke up in Pod 7 had better luck with its calibration than they did. Elena looked up. The pod was named in the records, Ori 7 said. They knew which one you were. And Ori 7 left. Elena sat with that for a long time. She opened a new log entry and wrote. Very briefly, they knew, they always Knew they kept the file open because they always knew. She saved it, closed it. She opened the signal graph. The ship moved through space that was quieter than she remembered, quieter in the electromagnetic sense, no longer cluttered with the radio noise of a young civilization broadcasting in every direction. The stars were in different positions technically, not wrong, just shifted the way everything shifts when given enough time. She had recalculated the positions 3 times. She trusted the math. On day 31, she went to the rear observation panel and stood there for an hour looking at a specific point in the sky. The coordinates were where Earth had been. The actual position was 12 degrees off. Now, due to a million years of stellar drift, she had calculated this precisely. She stood at 12 degrees off and looked at where Earth had been anyway. Seal found her there and did not ask why. She was looking at empty space, just stood beside her and looked at the same point in silence in the way that meant they understood without needing it explained. Elena had been storing her grandmother's genetic donor file unopened on her tablet for 11 days. She opened it. Adez Ayakifar, born Lagos, 2198. Voluntary genetic contributor, Uplift. Continuity Project Year 0. Day 4. Her grandmother had known. Before Elena was born, before any of this, her grandmother had walked into a project office and made a contribution to a species that would not fully exist for 500,000 years because someone asked, and her grandmother was the kind of person who said yes to things that mattered even when she could not see where they ended. Elena closed the file. She did not open it again that day. On day 38, she wrote the message. She drafted it 37 times. The first draft was 300 words. Each draft after that was shorter. The 37th draft was 11 words. She looked at it for a long time. It said, "My name is Elena. I was the last one in. I am coming." She transmitted it on a 1.4 gigahertz carrier, the same frequency as the song the repository had been playing for a million years. She sat in the chair that Den had built her and ran a systems check on all 7 of the ship's primary drives and cross-referenced the translated star charts with her archive data and started a new log entry about the acoustic properties of the hull in open space. 42 minutes after she transmitted, the communication array registered an incoming signal. She read the translation 3 times. She read it a 4th time. It said in English, in a form of English that was older and richer and more layered than anything she had archived. A form that felt like English the way cathedral feels like a house. We wondered when you would wake up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said to Ori 7, who had appeared in the doorway at the sound of the alert, "Tell the crew we have an estimated arrival in 12 days. Ori 7 made the sound that meant understood. "And tell Dan," Elena added, "that the chair is excellent." She turned back to the screen and the signal that was now strong enough to carry harmonics, and she started building the translation module for what came next. Her hands were very steady. She had a great deal of work to do. They came out of the transit point into a system that was not on any chart she had, because her charts were 1,000,000 years old, and 1,000,000 years is enough time for a civilization to rearrange things significantly. There were 43 planets, not naturally. Naturally there had been 11. She could reconstruct the original system, architecture from the mass distribution. But the remaining 32 had been moved, repositioned, arranged with a precision that did not suggest engineering so much as intention, a deliberate organization by a civilization that had decided it, preferred a different configuration, and had the patience to achieve it. The fourth planet was surrounded by ring structure that was not astronomical but architectural, continuous surface circling the planet at equatorial orbit, and on the surface of that ring, visible even at this distance as a texture, a pattern that resolved as the ship moved closer into individual structures, buildings, and entire civilization spread across a band that encircled a whole world. Seal made a sound Alina had not heard from an Ari before. She logged it for later, filed it under wonder, encountering the incomprehensible. At scale, a voice came through the communication array, the same English as the message, older and warmer, and carrying something that was unmistakably human in origin, even after everything that had passed. Then, Asara, you are cleared for approach. We are sending a flight path. Please follow it exactly. We have prepared a landing area. A pause. Sound that was almost a laugh, brief and genuine. We have been preparing it for a while. The flight path arrived. Alina looked at it and immediately identified three decisions in the routing that chose a scenic approach over efficiency, and she was about to say something about it when she realized, with a feeling entirely outside her cataloging vocabulary, that whoever built the path had wanted her to see something specific. She flew it as given. What she saw, coming in low over the ring structure's surface, was a city built around parks, not incidentally. Deliberately, the structures grew around green spaces the way the station's walls had grown into the forest. The architecture and the living things woven together with the specific care of people who had spent a very long time deciding how they wanted to live. Children were visible from altitude, running, something she recognized as an argument happening in a market square. Below, a building under construction, the workers visible on its upper framework, and one of them was gesturing at another in a manner that needed no cultural translation at all. She thought they are still arguing about the right way to build things. She thought, of course they are. The landing area was marked with a beacon and surrounded by a crowd that was carefully maintaining a respectful distance, which was itself a piece of information. Someone had organized that distance. Someone had decided the right thing was to give her room. She sat in the ship for a moment after the engines cut. Ori 7 appeared beside her, said nothing, just stood there in the way Seal had stood at the observation panel, present, without demanding anything from the presence. Ready, Ori 7 said. No, Alina said. She stood up and walked to the landing ramp and stepped out. The air hit her differently than the air on the Aru world. This air knew her. That was not a scientific observation. It was the kind of thing she did not normally log, but it was true in the way things are true when they reach you. Below the level of language, the person who came forward from the waiting group was a woman, older, unhurried, with the particular posture of someone who has spent a long time in command and settled into it comfortably. Her name, she said, was Nina Hale. She said it simply, without title or ceremony. She looked at Alina the way you look at someone you have been reading about your entire life and have finally, after Very long time, gotten to meet. Elena Vasquez-Acafer, Nina said. Status arrived. Elena said, someone kept that file open. For 1,000,000 years. Yes, Nina said, we take our archives. Seriously. Elena looked at her for a moment, then. She said, who was she, the woman? Singing in the repository transmission. I went through every record I have. I could not find her. Nina smiled. It was a complicated smile. The kind that carries a long story in a small space. Her name was Grace Tello, Nina said. She was not in any official record. Because she held no official title, she was a maintenance engineer for the Cryo systems. She recorded the transmission because someone told her to, and she said she would only do it if she could sing something because she said 1,000,000 years of silence needed something warm in it. Elena said nothing. She never did anything else historically notable, Nina said. She repaired cryo calibrations and she sang one song and she went home. Elena reached into her jacket pocket and took out the big pen in its preservation resin casing. She held it out. Nina looked at it. Her expression shifted into something older, something that was not personal memory but was very close to it, the way you recognize a face from a photograph you grew up with. We found several of those over the centuries, Nina said, in various archaeological layers. We kept them. The Arrow gave this one to me, Elena said. They were keeping it for me. They kept it because they were told to. In 40,000 years, you cover a great deal of material, Nina said. She turned and walked back toward the city, and Elena walked beside her, and behind them, Ori 7 and Seal and Den and the rest of the crew followed, and the crowd that had been maintaining its respectful distance moved with them, not pressing in, just present. The way people are present when something they did not expect to actually happen finally happens. The city was extraordinary, Elena catalogued it as they walked, not as deflection, genuinely as the appropriate response. The material science alone was enough for 100 separate entries. The botanical integration represented techniques she had no framework for. The energy infrastructure was invisible, meaning it was fully embedded, meaning someone had resolved 3 separate physics problems that our era had considered unsolvable. She also noticed that the bakery they passed was having some kind of disagreement about its display arrangement, visible through the window. 2 people completely certain of 2 different configurations. How many people, she asked Nina, in this system? Currently around 18 billion, Nina said, across all 40 star systems, closer to 400 billion, not counting the ones who chose the translated path. We keep a rough estimate for those. A rough estimate, Elena said. They are not easy to count, Nina said. They check in occasionally. They seem to be well. They walked through a park that had a fountain in it, and the sound of the water was the most recognizable sound she had encountered since waking up, and she did not slow down, but she noted it and filed it under some things do not change, and that is not a small thing. The building Nina stopped at was not a government hall or a monument. It was a research facility, the kind of building that hums quietly and smells like filtered air and has too many screens visible through its windows, the kind of building where people forget to eat because they are in the middle of something. Nina stopped at the entrance. We have a position, she said. We have. needed an archivist for a very long time. We have excellent archivists, but we have a backlog that is, in technical terms, significant. How significant? Elena said. 1,000,000 years, Nina said, give or take. Elena looked at the building. She looked at the people visible through the windows, moving with purpose, working with the energy of people who care deeply about what they are doing. The Aru, she said, they need to be part of this. We hoped you would say that, Nina said. We have been making preparations. And the memorial, Elena said, I want to see it. It is in the next system, Nina said. I will take you when you are ready. When I am ready, Elena said. She put her hand on the door of the building and looked inside through the glass. Someone at a desk saw her and went very still. Then that person stood and said something to the person at the next desk, and that person looked up, and then others, and there was a moment that moved through the room the way light moves through the repository crystal, outward from one point, each person receiving it in turn. She pushed the door open. The room was quiet when she entered, not the silence of people who have nothing to say, the silence of people who have too much to say and are choosing their words with care. She walked to an open desk. It had a screen. It had a chair that was exactly the right height, which she noted, and the desk surface had a small indentation on the right side where a tablet would rest comfortably, which she also noted and set her tablet into, and it fit perfectly. Someone had known, someone had built this desk knowing. She sat down. Across the room she could see a small framed piece of text on the wall. She could not read it from here. She would read it later. She would add it to the archive. Behind her, through the open door, she could hear Seal and Ori 7 and Den encountering the city for the first time, and the sounds they made were the sounds of people meeting their own origin in person, and it was the best thing she had ever heard, and she did not say this out loud to anyone. She looked at her tablet, cracked screen still running. 4,411 archived entries, plus everything she had added since day one, which was more than she had expected and less than there was left to do. She opened a new entry. She looked around the room at the people looking at her, not with the reverence the oracles shown her, not the reverence of mythology, but with something warmer and more specific. Recognition. The look of people who see in her something they carry in themselves, in whatever complicated and expanded form 1,000,000 years of living carries forward. The stubbornness and curiosity and absolute refusal of a people who once looked at the dark and decided to go there. Day one, she said. To the room. To the ones who left and the ones who waited and the ones who kept a file marked pending for 1,000,000 years, because they understood in the deep and stubborn way her people had always understood things, that absent is not the same as gone. Let's get to work. She started typing. The room settled back into motion around her. The quiet, steady hum of a civilization that had been working for a very long time, and she fit into it the way the tablet fit the indentation on the desk, precisely, without any adjustment at all, as though the space had always been waiting for exactly this shape. She had 1,000,000 years of backlog. She had always worked best when there was a great deal to do. The crack across her screen did not affect the display at all.